and action. Let's think about tools and light sources and things like that. You know, throughout this workshop, we've been doing a lot of study of seeing the light and managing the light, and really important stuff so that we can work with light the way we want. The goal of this series has been that so you can look at a scenario, see the light, see what you want to accomplish with it, and know what to do with it. Let's talk a bit though about, you know, looking at some artificial light sources, some reflectors, things like that. Now this isn't a workshop about setting up strobes and things like that. We could have a whole nother series on that, and I don't want to get too distracted from the concept of understanding our light really well. But we don't want to be intimidated by using alternate light sources, by using reflectors, by using other tools that make light work for us. You know, this is a 500 LED panel that I've started working with recently. And LEDs seem to be on the rise. There's a lot of LED stuff out there. And for more localized areas where you don't have to light a huge area, they can be really powerful because they're a constant light source and you can see what's happening. So you can really shape your light nicely with it. And they tend to be pretty portable. You know, if I turn this on, even though it's light out here, if it was darker out, we'd see a drastic difference, but there's still a lot of light being thrown from this. And then of course I can adjust the brightness with the switches on it. So this would be great for a localized fill light, even in a daylit scene like this, or for lighting a portrait or something like that was closer up. You're probably not going to take this out and light a large scale scene. You know, you're certainly not going to take an LED out and light a landscape with it. So you got to have the right tool for the right application. But the thing to remember is most of these concepts we've been studying, the ways we've been talking about seeing and understanding light, they don't get thrown out the door when you change types of light source, when you blend artificial light with natural light to augment it. All of the concepts, all this stuff we're working with is essentially the same. You know, let's grab the reflector here. This is probably a 30-inch, just a round reflector, and you could put it on a stand so it held up on somewhere, or you could have somebody hold it. Just a very traditional reflector. If you have light coming in, maybe it's an artificial light like this, maybe there's some natural light, you know, just watch as I reflect light. I can bring light back into my face using the reflector and control direction. I clearly have light coming at me from this side, but I can use this reflector, bounce a little bit of that back, and kick a little in here to fill it from the other side. So what am I doing? Now I'm controlling intensities of the ratio and things like that of my light to decide how I want the light to wrap, how I want the shadows to fall. You know, a common way you'll see reflectors used is just kind of being held under here. If you're doing like a head and shoulder shot, you can really reflect some beautiful light back into the face. Very simple tool. In fact, it's such a simple tool that oftentimes you can do it without a reflector. There may be a piece of concrete or a white building that you can put your subject near, whether in frame or out, that's bouncing natural light back in, or that you can bounce a flash off of. Oftentimes in a scenario, let's say like a wedding reception, I'll be bouncing a flash off a wall or off a ceiling or something like that. So don't get intimidated by alternate light sources. Apply all these things we've been working with throughout this series to whatever light source you're using, whether it be natural, a strobe, an LED, constant light, using reflectors, whatever you want to do. You know, I'm standing under a tree right here. Well, the light's a little flat out here. If we were doing a portrait, we might augment a little bit with something like this. Or maybe we'd wait till the sun to come out outside the shadow area and use a reflector like this to just bounce some of that warm sunlight into my face so I was kind of spotlighted. There's simple ways we can manage and work with the light. You know, let's get into some other types of light. The strobe, this is a compact strobe, or commonly referred to as a speed light, of course, but really a powerful thing in terms of how much power it can put out, how long the batteries will last, and how much we can do with it. It's really powerful. Now, there's infinite number of things that you can do with this. Yes, you can put it on camera, or you could turn it up and bounce it off a ceiling or something like that, and gives you high degree of portability and functionality. But oftentimes the most powerful thing a photographer can do with a strobe like this is get it off camera. I use these little wireless triggers. These are Radio Popper Juniors, and I really like them. They're fully manual, but I can put this on my hot shoe, and then with these little dials on here, I can control remotely the power of my strobe. So I'll put 2, 3 strobes out there, and I'll just set them up and off I go, and I can control the power right from here. You know, there's ETTL, automatic systems for triggering flashes. There's expensive ones, you know, these are kind of mid-price. There's There's inexpensive ones that are just fully manual and they pretty much just trigger the flash remotely. The bottom line is it's not hard to get into something that you can hook up to a compact strobe like this or even a larger strobe and trigger it remotely. You know, using things like this, I've done a lot of work in terms of like portraits and stuff like that with just 1 or 2 strobes. It's amazing what you can do with it. Oftentimes, let's say you're in an outdoor scenario. Personally, I do a lot of environmental portrait type work. And you know, let's say I'm standing on the edge of a canyon and there's a sunset back here and I have a bride and a groom standing here. And I've been in this scenario where if we expose for that sunset, which is obviously brighter, you know, so here is our sunset back here, here's our bride and groom right here, and here's me standing here with the camera. Well, I want to photograph them, they're the subject, but I want to take advantage of all this beautiful stuff back here and this beautiful sunset going on. Well, if I meter that sunset and I expose for that sunset, obviously the light's radiating in that sunset, they're going to be in shadow and that's going to cause a problem. So to compensate for that, I can key for the background. And I can do that in this case using a strobe. Now this is commonly referred to as the Strobist effect. Although this is a technique that's been around for a long time, and essentially you're keying the light on the subject for that background so that you balance them out correctly. Now in the case of a portrait, you know, let's think about our zones. I might want this couple and their skin to be around zone 6, and I might want to keep that sunset maybe around zone 6, maybe around zone 7, something like that, depending on what's going to complement my subject the best. The bottom line is I can essentially expose back here for that sunset. There's the natural light. I can't illuminate that with a strobe or an LED. So I'm going to expose for that, then I'm going to use an artificial light to balance out the foreground light and put my subject where I want. And I've done a scenario just like this, where here's a sunset, you know, we're standing over this valley, standing on the edge of the bluff is the bride and groom holding hands. Just took a light like this, put it down in the rocks and threw some light up into their face to illuminate them and balance it out. The ideal situation with that is not to pump in too much light because you don't want a harsh flashlit look. You're trying to get a natural look typically so that you have kind of your pictorial landscape and then your foreground. But this same concept can be used in all kinds of scenarios depending on what it is you're trying to balance that light with. What I'm getting at is not exactly how you need to set up a light, but that there's all these different tools that you can work with to make the light work for you. Here's a more compact light panel. This one just runs off internal AA batteries. And it's again great for doing a fairly close-up portrait, working with video, stuff like that. But I've used lights just like this to do some really nice portrait work by just placing them in the corner, something like that, to get a little bit of fill light going on and control my light source. What I love about the LEDs is I can see exactly what's happening and I can position them really well. Constant lights in general, but LEDs are low heat and low power consumption. You know, of course, all the principles that we've discussed throughout in terms of the metering are going to apply to this too. You know, I've talked about I favor my Pentax digital spot meter because I can just point it around and I can get exposure value readings and I can very quickly see ratios. I can see how much dynamic range from the darks to the highlights that I'm dealing with. But if I'm getting into a situation where I'm working with strobes, I'm probably going to use something more like this. This is a Seim L508, but the higher end Seiconics you can not only do strobe work with. You can plug a strobe into, some of the newer ones even do wireless, and you can take meter readings with the strobe, but you can also do it with spot metering. And I favor the spot metering because it really makes it easy to work with the zone system. But of course you can do, as we talked about in the meters, you can do the incident meter where it's reading the light that's falling on the bulb versus the spot meter where you're reading the light being reflected back in towards the camera. So whatever situation you're in, don't be intimidated by your light. Stop, slow down, visualize. Think about what you want to accomplish with this exposure, and then think about how you can accomplish it. What tools do you have? Do you have a reflector? Maybe you don't have a reflector, but maybe there's a big old white board sitting over there, or maybe it's not even white. Maybe it's a piece of plywood and it's going to reflect sunlight in a really warm golden way, and that's going to work perfect for what you want. Don't be afraid to improvise. Don't think that you have to have the latest, $1,000 tool to manipulate light, because making a good exposure, making the light work for you is all about being able to see that light and knowing what to do with it. Whether you're pulling out an LED or a strobe or a reflector, or whether you're using a building as a reflector, or whether you're using a tree as a reflector, it really doesn't matter as long as you're understanding what you're seeing, as long as you're looking around and seeing that light. I recently did a large family portrait in kind of a forested scene like this, where in the background we had a river, so of course the tones on that are lighter, but this whole family of almost 30 people is kind of in the trees and they're in shadow. Well, in that case, I kind of had to key that light for the background. I had to pump in a lot of light to balance out this large area. Something like this wouldn't have cut it. And just a reflector wouldn't have cut it, because I got to really get enough light in there to cover a large group of people in this shadowed area. So in that case, I used larger strobes. I used, I think it was 3 Alien B 320 watt second strobes. So we had almost 1,000 watt seconds of light, you know, kind of here, here, and here, and then here's a family just pumping a lot of light in. Just a different scenario. The same concept of trying to balance out the light, get the tones of their faces and what we want to come out in that image to look the way we want. It's about seeing and understanding the light we're seeing and understanding different tools that we can use to manage it. Don't be intimidated, just try the tools, try whatever you have available right now to make the light work your way.